Welcome to the Path and Purpose podcast, where we explore the journey of living and leading from your soul's purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Cameron Martin. As a spiritual coach and leader, I've dedicated my life to helping changemakers, creatives, and conscious leaders align with their soul's calling. In each episode, we dive deep into the stories of those who are paving the way for a more conscious and compassionate world. My purpose is to explore the intersection of spirituality and leadership, offering you practical insights and inspiration to live and lead with authenticity. Join me as we discover how to embrace our soul gifts, overcome barriers, and learn to lead from being. This podcast will inspire you to live in alignment with your soul's purpose and create a lasting impact, one conversation at a time. On today's episode, I'm here with Christopher August. Christopher is a transformation guide, master breathwork facilitator, and the co-founder of Beats Breathwork app and Wellness Hub, who's on a mission to create a more conscious, connected world, one breath at a time. I'm excited to share this space with you today. Welcome, Christopher.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. We're going to get into your story, of course, in just a moment, but I pulled up your birth chart. I want to say a couple things about your birth chart. And so have you ever had your birth chart read before?
I have. I've had a couple astrology readings over the years, which I find extremely fascinating, but haven't had my chart read in a little while. So it'll be great to hear whatever you have to say.
Okay, we'll go with it. So I'll say a couple of things. It won't go too intimate for the audience, but I'll share some things with you. So Sun in Capricorn and several planets actually in Capricorn in your 10th house. So your mission on this planet is pretty important to you. The work that you do, achieving, leaving behind some sort of a legacy, however you understand that, is pretty important to you. The way in which you do your work is very unique and should be connected to sharing your voice, your ideas, your thoughts, your perspectives, your philosophies on things. You probably do like to travel and connect with cultures and people from all over the world. In fact, that's part of your work in some respects. You are someone who is quite spiritually gifted and has a sense that when people are around you, they sense optimism and good luck and good fortune. But there is something, maybe shamanic even about you that people feel when they're in your presence. Which I think is pretty cool. You are someone that personal growth and transformation, a big part of who you are. You love it, and you have a lot of power, personal power, when it comes to any sort of personal growth journey and supporting others in that. Now, I understand the work that you do, and you'll share more about that. But for sure, personal growth and development, the scorpionic themes of life and psychology are super important to who you are as a being. You also have a love for humanity and a love for all things below the surface and spiritual, non-physical, transcendent of this particular realm. To say, I suppose you could say, New Earth guide in many ways. You really do love humanity and where we're going. You actually have a grand trine in your chart, which is a pretty rare sort of connection here between, I won't say which three planets, but I will say that your voice is very important. Learning to harness the power of your voice is very important. And you're learning a lot of lessons around self and expressing yourself and showing up and creating and sharing your gifts with others. So how did we do?
I would say you're spot on. I would say that is extremely accurate. Yes, 100%.
And so I'm going to let you, of course, share how that story goes.
Yeah.
But we'll start there, actually. So what really marked the beginning of your spiritual journey and sort of your awakening?
Yeah. I think there's many catalyst points for me that I can think off the top of my head. But, really where it really kicked off was in about 2008. I was in college, and during that time, there definitely was some expansive thinking happening where I was starting to question some things. And, I would consider myself outside of the box, a little fringe in many ways. And always asking deeper questions. That was always a part of my nature, but it really started to open up at that point. And as I started to do so, I was gifted a book, which was sort of that, everybody remembers kind of that first book within this realm. What kind of transpired as you read that? And for me, that was Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. And
Great
so
one.
it just confirmed, yeah, for sure. And it just confirmed that, there is more to this reality. There is this sense in what I believe to be reincarnation, and where our souls are recycled through this planet in many ways. And we have these different experiences. So all of that was very validating and confirming for what I already had thought. And then to fast forward a few years, I was in the corporate world. I finished my master's degree, and I was just numb. I was disconnected. I was having a good time. I was 26. I was partying. I was having a lot of fun, but there was still just this emptiness that kind of like lived inside me, this void space. And without getting into all the details, essentially, I was asking for a sign, asking for where am I supposed to be? Because here on paper at 26, I'm making good money. I'm climbing the corporate ladder. The vice president of the company's liking what I'm doing. I'm have enough money to go have fun, take a vacation, all these things that are great materially, but spiritually, I was just very much sucked dry. There wasn't any sort of life in there. And so I asked for a sign. And one day on the drive home, I was looking on the highway, and there was a billboard say, "Are you ready to answer the call?" And on this billboard in the right-hand corner, it said sponsored by the Peace Corps. And so I was very intrigued by what's the Peace Corps? What is
Mm.
this organization? And am I ready to answer what call? So
Yeah,
um,
what is the call you're talking about?
there was an inner calling, but I just didn't know what it was. It was very mysterious in that way, but also very intriguing. And so I went home, Googled the Peace Corps, found out that it's an American grassroots sort of organization sponsored by the American government. They send people to 80 different countries around the world to volunteer in many sectors of life: health, business, agriculture, teaching English, and so on. And so I was immediately infatuated with this idea, because there was a depth of me that wanted to help people, wanted to travel the world, wanted to find deeper purpose and meaning. All of these things that were calling me, I just didn't know how that would transpire. So I went through the application process, and I found myself about a year and a half later boarding a plane to Tanzania, Africa, where I lived there for 2 years. So that in itself was the catalyst to get me to sort of question even deeper and to discover myself. But I'll pause there before I go any deeper than that.
Yeah, because I definitely want to explore Tanzania for sure. So, actually, I do want to explore if you remember. Obviously, you saw this billboard. What's this call? Call. Life's good, but maybe there's something in me that says I want more. Um, would you say that this might have been one of the first times that you were like learning to listen to your higher self or your guides, your soul, however you might want to speak to that? Or were you kind of familiar with this feeling?
I would say that I've always been intuitive without maybe saying that word intuitive, but there's been like this, I can sense energy, and I can sense, I can just tune into myself when something resonates with me. So maybe I wouldn't have put the same language or terminology around it as maybe I would now, but there was this sort of sense within me when I knew something within myself. I'm like, okay, I need to follow this. I don't know what this is, but I need to follow it.
Yeah, I've talked about this with different people on the show before, and my own life, I would describe as I've had many trust falls with the universe, we'll
Mm.
say, where you get this like, oh, this is a calling, and I don't understand at all why or like where this is going, but I can feel it and I know it. And for me, moving across the country from Massachusetts to San Diego, that was one of them. When I received guidance to move from San Diego to Maui, that was one of them. When I received guidance for many months about moving to Los Angeles, that was one of them. All of mine were connected to moves in some way, but there have been others as well, where there's these deep, like, oh, I know this inside of me. I feel it in my gut. I know it in my being. and I'm just going to jump and kind of see what happens. Now, I've been shown multiple times, or every single time actually, that the universe will support you and you'll be shown what comes next. I've learned to live my life in this way. And my listeners have heard stories before, but I'm curious what that trust fall was for you moving to Tanzania.
Yeah, I can very much resonate with what you shared there. For me, moving and having lived in many places, there's always that calling. It just kind of happens, right? And for me, it was a big decision, obviously, because I had been living in Buffalo, New York. I had my comfort zone of all my friends. I had this secure job. To leave all of that to move to not only another country, but a place where everything's very primitive, right? There's no electricity, there's no modern amenities. It's 8,000 miles away from home. It's a pretty big monumental decision, but overall the fear that maybe have, came up and some anxiety that came up at the time, I knew that if I didn't make that decision, then I would live in regret. And that's the last thing I want from this incarnation, is to live in any sort of regret. So I'm like, no, fuck it. Like, let's do this. So that's just, I'm kind of an all in type of person. I'm pretty intense like that. Just kind of like, let's see what happens. The worst case, I can come home. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Worst case, you can come home. Well, that's your Pluto in Scorpio, which is generational for us. That's the millennial generation. But where it is in your chart, yeah, you like to push yourself um, to the point of absolute growth, Phoenix rising. We'll
That's
call
it.
it that.
Yep.
Interesting. So then, when you were in Tanzania, what were you doing there?
Yeah, so I was a health and business volunteer. So essentially, to break that down in simple, straightforward terms, I was teaching at the primary school, some different things about nutrition and yeah, basic things. I also built and had a rainwater catchment tank put in at the school, so they have some level of clean water. I had solar panels installed, and then I did a business project where I work with nine community members, these women in the community that had a problem where all of their crops, they had them left over. They would try to sell them in town, but they couldn't sell all of them, so they have all this extra crops that they couldn't do anything with. And so we started a little village eatery in my village, and where people can come and get a plate of rice and beans, chicha, which is spinach, and some other basic Tanzanian staples. And so that was a great project as well. So yeah, I did several things, but really at the end of the day, it's like all about just you know creating relationships. That's like what the whole experience is about. It's like just creating relationships with people, and that in itself was extremely profound, to live amongst a community in this way. Whereas coming from the Western world, it's very individualized and stagnant. Any form of community, it's very difficult in that way. So, yeah, all in all, that was pretty much it.
Hmm. Yeah, well, in Buffalo, New York, you got a lot of snow, so you stay inside your home, right?
In the winters,
um,
yes.
in the winters, yeah, of course. So I grew up in New England and Massachusetts, but it's not Buffalo,
Yeah.
although we get plenty of snow too. Okay, so you went and sought to have some sort of experience of self, wanting to know more about who you were and your purpose. And aside from community, which sounds like an extremely important lesson that came from that, what else did you discover about yourself?
Yeah, there's many things there. I aside from working, it was a very much a self-reflection period. 2 years living primally, no electricity, like I mentioned, no running water, no modern amenities, cooking over a charcoal stove or a wood burning, clay pot. There was a lot there that I learned about myself, of course, and having to live this daily life within this community. But it really allowed me to go inwards, and it was there, I picked up different forms of meditation and yoga, and there wasn't much else to do but read, write, meditate, and just be amongst the elements in nature. So it really was a great reflection time for me to really start to understand or understand, what it is that I'm here to do on this planet. Because I just left the corporate world. Now I'm here with these questions, these deep questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? How can I serve? All these things. And it was a lot of inquiry met with a lot of challenge. There's a lot of emotional instability, a lot of deep process of working with and moving through many fears. There was a really big emotional makeover, mental makeover for myself, spiritual makeover overall. So yeah, it was very powerful.
Mm. I definitely want to. I'm going to ask you how your story kind of progressed to do the work you're doing now, but this sounds like it was so foundational for you. I'm curious, even today, perhaps you think about this, but what are the lessons that, would you call this the undeveloped world or the developing world?
Perhaps developing, yeah.
Okay, I'm not quite
To
sure.
be politically
um,
correct, I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. So, well, experiences like that versus what is experienced in the developed world, because you're talking about having essentially a lot of space to kind of just be and be in nature and connect with whatever is present around you. Whereas in the Western world and in our modern lives, my God, distraction upon distraction upon distraction, which honestly can make the spiritual journey for a lot of people unattainable.
Mm.
I would argue that's why so much of the distraction, so that you become disconnected from self. But I'm just curious from your own experience. I don't want to put words in your mouth. What sort of spiritual lessons do you think we can gain? Maybe you gained from that time, but that we can learn in the West, um, that perhaps we're not aware of because of our ways of being.
Mm. Great question. Well, I don't know if I would call them lessons so much, but more so teachings.
Hmm.
You are absolutely correct in saying that a lot of the reason in which we maybe don't have that deep of a connection and we've lost touch with ourselves is because of the distractions, information overload all the time. And that really creates a lot of noise internally, mentally. And when you don't have that noise, when you don't have that interference, something else opens up. And what opens up is a new vista of possibility and potentiality, listening to the voice of your soul versus the voice of your ego. Right. And that's really the difference, is like that whole aspect just opens up completely when you have stillness, when you have silence. And, in the villages, and living amongst these elements in this way, there is a very, very profound connection that you can have with yourself and with the universe. I mean, you look up at the sky and you can see the Milky Way. You can see everything. It's like someone threw glitter over the sky. It's incredible. So there's a deep introspection that happens as a result of that. And through that, I learned so many things, many things that still support me in this day, lessons of surrender, of acceptance, of trust, all of these things which are pivotal and fundamental to our spiritual development.
Yeah, you're speaking to, I mean, this fundamental idea that our connection to nature, and I would extend to the cosmos, not the same, but my time in Maui was very transformative in a similar way,
Mm.
in the sense that connection to nature, I mean, my goodness, the nature is alive. The spirits, the mana, the ancestors, it is literally potent. You breathe it. You go for a walk in the forest and you're like, oh my God, this place is totally alive. Um, the energy on the beaches, and honestly, just the way that the Hawaiians are connected to nature around them and their understanding. So for me, it was deeply powerful in a similar way. And also being in the middle of nowhere out in the ocean, my God, the stars. I mean, the astrologer loved it because there were so many stars, and probably similar, although we still had cities, but similar, like glitter thrown up in the sky. I like that.
Yep.
Here in Los Angeles, I'm lucky if I can see the moon, which is a little depressing for me. But nonetheless, I feel like I know that I learned so much about connection to nature and really what that means about us spiritually. And then, yeah, now being here, it's a very different experience altogether. So I definitely feel resonance there with you.
Yeah.
So, okay, so after this experience, what happened next? Did you go back to your life and took another job or what?
Well, I did go back to Buffalo, which, in hindsight, the timing was really bad because it was going into winter. So it was just like super depressing. And I actually fell into a pretty deep depression for about 6 months. I had what people may call reverse culture shock, coming back and just seeing the consumerist nature of America and all of the bullshit, right, that people complain about. It's like, this doesn't matter at all. So I
Mhm.
was really in this existential crisis once again, and really went into this dark night. But yeah, overall, after pulling myself out of that, I'd come back with my girlfriend at the time, or my fiance. We got engaged there, and she was very helpful in supporting me in this process, because she was also from the States, was a Peace Corps volunteer, had her own turmoil and struggles. So we were kind of getting through it together, but went on to, yeah, I ended up working at an herbal shop. I was very interested in herbs. I was getting my certification in herbalism. I was going for a certain other certification in breath work, and really just exploring these different realms that, for me, were very interesting and something that I wanted to pursue, but just didn't really know how it looked. So between working at an herb shop, working and starting a podcast, which I ended up doing, there was, yeah, just some curiosities and some things I was doing to really explore this entrepreneurial lifestyle.
Because you weren't going back to corporate America.
There was no way that I was doing that, but there was a little hitch in the story, which is a little bit later on. I ended up going back to not corporate America, but actually having to utilize my master's degree for about a year and a half when my son was born, which was very interesting. But it was actually at my old university, and it was like a very easy job, and I was able to build my business completely on the side doing that.
Cool. Well, I do want to hear about the business and the work that you're doing now. I'm going to ask a question about breath work, but if this is a jump, you can pick up your story wherever you like. Um, but one of the things that I share with all of my clients, and we started this conversation with your birth chart, and when you're looking at a birth chart, is that essentially it is a blueprint for your life. And where did it begin? Well, the moment of your first breath. And the idea is that your first breath on this planet, wherever you were, had an energetic signature. And that becomes part of who you are and how you navigate this world. And so I'm giving you a little open here to describe the power of breath. But essentially, recognizing that, well, our life begins and ends with breath. And it is such a transformative and powerful tool for spiritual discovery. So I'll let you go where you want to with that little opening. And maybe we're not there in your story yet, and you can tell me that. But I'm curious where the breath practice came in for you.
No, let's roll with it. I love that as well. Thanks for sharing that. And well, I'll back up a little bit. When I was in Tanzania, I went to a New Year's Eve party in Zimbabwe. There was like a music festival, and I had traveled there. And when I was there, there was many different experiences happening. One, mostly adrenaline filled experiences, where on the Zambezi River, which is a gorgeous place, they were doing whitewater rafting. And for some reason, my higher self told me, that's a good idea. Go raft on the Zambezi River. You never rafted in your life. And which is like, if you know about the Zambezi, it's one of the more chaotic rivers in the world, actually. And they're known for their really extreme rapids. And so I ended up signing up for this whitewater rafting trip. And that experience was another pivotal point and catalyst where, uh, moving into about the 12th or 13th rapid, it was a class 5 rapid. I was in the front left of the boat, and we had hit the first rapid on that entire rapid, which was very long. and I had got ejected from the boat and fell into the water and rode the rapid all the way through. And if you can imagine a class 5 rapid, which is really reserved for professionals, it's very intense. And so I
Yeah,
was,
this is like close to death scenario. Yeah.
it was, yeah, yeah. So it was the edge of death for me. So I actually pretty much drowned in that experience. And I was very rapidly, I hit these rocks I don't even really fully remember, and this kayaker yanked me out of the water and pulled me onto the boat or onto the kayak, and he was just like pumping my chest, and I was like coughing up all this water. And so that was the moment. The reason I share that is because that was the moment where I had lost my breath. I had almost died. And I then regained consciousness, regained my breath. And from that point, it was like, whoa, I needed that. I didn't think this in the moment, but down the line, as I reflected on this, I needed to have that experience to know that never take your breath for granted, and your breath is the most powerful tool that you have. Yet it's the most underlooked and overlooked by society. We just take it for granted because it's, a survival function, a mechanism that keeps us alive, and that's automatic. But when we actually tune into it, when we bring conscious awareness and intention to our breathing, then we actually discover that it's much more than just this function, this fundamental force of keeping us alive. It's a gateway, it's a key, it's a key to liberation, it's a key to freedom. And there is a lot of beautiful, powerful, transformative experiences you can have by just using your breath. And in fact, I'm in the process of getting my book edited, which is called Master Your Breath, Transform Your Life. And the whole concept of this book is to bring awareness to the power and the potential of breath for healing, for awakening, for expansion, for manifestation. Pretty much you can tie it into everything. So yeah, I'll stop there for a second. I can keep going, but we'll leave it
It's
there.
perfect. Well, we don't have to interrupt the breath. Let it go. Actually, I'm curious though. You are sort of answering it, but I want to be more explicit, maybe for listeners who are not familiar with breath work. So, what is that? And
Yeah.
you have been talking about it, but how would you define it, and why would anybody care on a spiritual journey?
Yeah, great question. So, breath work, as I define it, and we'll define it very simply here, is just the conscious act of breathing. It's an active meditation in which we begin to allow our awareness to expand as well as to improve our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well being. And the way in which that happens is all through the way in which we regulate ourselves, which is directly correlated with the nervous system. So with breath work, you're essentially breathing in different rhythms. There's sympathetic breathing. There's really two types of breathing. There's different practices and styles, but there's two types of breathing: sympathetic breathing, parasympathetic breathing. Sympathetic breathing is active, energetic, fast-paced breathing to induce a certain state, which can be found in the likes of holotropic breath work, rebirthing breath work, and so forth, which I'll get into in a bit. And then on the parasympathetic side, it's more slow, steady breathing, which is more so to calm the fight or flight response in the sympathetic nervous system, and create a parasympathetic state where we're more relaxed, grounded, present, connected, clear, peaceful, joyful, and so on. That all comes from that experience of parasympathetic breathing. Now, most people are stuck in a fight or flight response, which means that most people, all people, have endured some level of wounding, of trauma, of conditioning, of programming, which has all resulted in a dysregulated breath pattern. And that dysregulated breath pattern, it manifests oftentimes as shallow breathing from the chest, holding the breath. And you'll find this out very quickly when you just start to bring awareness to just a few deep breaths, you start to feel, oh, wow, I've been holding my breath, or I've been breathing shallow from the chest. Most people take about 16 breaths per minute, which is way too much. And that is, equated to 23,000 breaths on average we breathe a day. So think about this: when you bring just a small fraction or percentage of awareness to your breath, you can really begin to shift things. But when we're unconscious and we're breathing, we don't notice until we actually find that, oh, when I begin to work with my breath, everything begins to change, because essentially what you're doing is shifting your state energetically, vibrationally, and that reverberates through your emotional body, mental body, and physical body.
So much to share in response to that. I'll share a bit from my own experience and then obviously have you respond. But the power of breath. I noticed just the other day. I mean, I actually, just in our conversation, when you said 16 breaths per minute, I instantly noticed my body slow down his breath. Like my body was like,
Beautiful.
16, then I must do less. But to be honest, the last few weeks for me have been very big. A lot of change, a lot of growth, a lot of inner patterns that I'm recognizing, a lot of work. I've spent a lot of time in front of a computer, and I've noticed, just general sort of tightness in the body. And, the other day I was in the shower and I was like, wow, my breathing is so shallow right now. And, I really honestly recognized it. And it was a beautiful indicator of just my state of being. Now, on the podcast, I talk about, and we'll get into this too, being centered leadership and what it means to actually become aware of your being. Yep. And one of the most powerful ways to do that, become aware of your state of being, is to recognize your breath and whatever other sensations are going on in the body, but your breath. And that's when it was very clear to me that night. I was like, okay, I need to shift this, because first of all, it just doesn't feel good, and it's affecting my state of being and my thinking, and it feels stressed and whatever. I was like, okay, I need to do something intentional to shift this. But I think about, I grew up a singer. And so I was a singer in the choir very young. And then even into my teen years, and I became a choir director, and I was a cantor, and I was paid to sing, and I took vocal lessons, and I was in several musicals, and I actually sang behind stage for the leads. So like singing was always really important to me. And the experience of creation that happens through the voice with breath. And all of that is about breath. I mean, if you're doing any sort of vocal work, and if you've ever done any sort of vocal work, then you know that essentially everything about singing is breathing.
Yep.
And
Precisely.
Controlling the breath and recognizing the breath, and honestly learning to use your diaphragm, and well, not just that, but your diaphragm and other cavities to sing in certain ways. And it was very interesting because I have just recently been working with a body worker where we've been doing some really interesting work around where I'm holding energy and trauma and things in my own body. A lot of that being kind of up here. For those of you who are listening, I'm pointing to sort of my clavicle area, chest, and then also in and around the abdomen. And I'm aware of what these particular patterns are and what I'm holding on to and all that. But as we were doing this work, he actually said to me, he goes, honestly, the fact that you have as powerful a diaphragm and your ability to sing the way that you do is astounding, because you're holding, so much in this area. And all to say, the breath is the entry point for all of this. And it's not just about like, okay, yeah, you came into this world and you're breathing and there's that. But this is a thing that most of us aren't bringing conscious awareness to, as you mentioned, because it does happen without us thinking about it. But when we bring conscious awareness to breath, we can shift a lot of things. And rather than reality happening to us, we actually can very literally create our reality by altering our state of consciousness in breathwork. So I mentioned singing, and for me, I do like breathwork, although in the past I've had my own hangups about it. Honestly, I thought it was kind of boring until I found some practitioners I was very interested in, and I've had some extremely powerful experiences with breathwork that are otherworldly, that are transcendent. I've seen my guides, I've seen Christ, I've seen so many other beings through breathwork,
Mm.
and I've not to this point felt drawn to do any sort of plant medicines. And I'm deeply sensitive psychically anyway, so it just has not been the moment for that. But breath has always been an access point to these other things. And as you said, this is right here in our bodies, it's right here with us. So I said a bit here, but I'll let you respond. However, maybe you've heard people talk like this before.
No, I appreciate you sharing all of that. And yeah, just, mirroring back, reflecting back what you shared, like, yeah, the breath is instrumental in using our voice and how we speak, how we sing, how we, whatever it might be. And interesting enough, my business partner in Beats and Breath, who creates all the music and journeys for our breathwork sessions, Johnny, he's a professional beatboxer. And that's another
Mhm.
aspect of like really using your breath, really understanding the mechanics of breath. So, yeah, I mean, the breath really spans across, it plays into various, many different aspects of our life. But to your point as well, most people are holding and storing some level of trauma within their bodies. The body is a repository for memories and for information and things that we've experienced in our lives. Will hold on to that as the stored energy that, unless released, will begin to cause all sorts of problems and what we would call dis-ease. Is all it's all a manifestation of the energy that's been stored in our body. So, most of the time we look at the Western medical system and you see just symptoms trying to be fixed and masked and trying to fix it from a physical level, but it's not on the physical level. It's energetic. The physical is the last manifestation of the energetic. So it's like when you work energetically with your breath and with other tools such as body work and so forth, you get to then dissolve and transmute those patterns, therefore freeing the life force within you. And that life force is the actual healing force that heals your body.
Mhm. My audience is going to be very familiar with what you just said, of course. And some of the work that I do is quantum healing hypnosis technique, or QHHT,
Beautiful.
which
Dolores
is
Cannon.
directly Dolores Cannon, yeah, which is directly related to this idea, of course, that your body is essentially a big storage device for memories, for energy, and your DNA does store this. When we can bring conscious awareness to things, great, because your body's talking all the time. If you're overweight or dealing with a chronic health issue or whatever it might be, there's something you are holding on to or dealing with or not dealing with that needs to be paid attention to. And through something like a past life regression or many other modalities, QHHT is past life regression, but we can come to understand what those things are and what those symptoms are showing. I've had extremely powerful experiences, actually, speaking of breath, with a client who had lung cancer and a tumor on her lung. And in one session, mind you, we figured out her higher self came through, her subconscious came through and told her exactly what this came from. And essentially, she was surprised, holding her breath and feeling suffocated in a relationship and needed to speak her truth, essentially. And she needed to have an experience of being cared for versus
Mm,
caring for other people. And
mm,
so her consciousness quite literally created the experience in her body of cancer so that she could learn these things about herself. And when she did, I mean, this was one of the best as client sessions, but when she understood the root of these things and when she took the action that, her higher self gave her, within 3 months, she cured herself of her cancer. Her doctors were like, what the hell happened to you? One hypnosis session and boom, all of this is gone. And she was thrilled, of course, 3 months in, saying, my doctor said that the tumor is practically gone and da 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 da. And within 6, she was cancer free.
Wow. Yeah, I believe
Now,
it. That's
but
powerful.
what is that? It is what you're saying here, that our consciousness is created, excuse me, other way around. Our body is created by our consciousness. Our consciousness is what's actually creating our physical form. And if you're experiencing a symptom, as you said, that's the end of the line. Like, you've actually missed something along the way. You've been missing the messages to the point where your body is starting to physically show you what's going on, right? Kidney issues, probably dealing with ancestral. Lung issues, probably dealing with breath or holding your breath, or grief, right? Or
Grief. Yeah, yeah.
things like grief usually. If it's cancer, it's usually anger that's being stored in the body that hasn't been processed, right? And we're not necessarily told that this is what's happening, but when you start to see it, it's pretty darn clear. Like, oh, the body is showing me that this is happening. And ultimately, we talk about hypnosis, which is just an altered form of consciousness or state of consciousness. How did we get there? Through breath. Essentially, by slowing your breath down enough to shift your consciousness so that you're in a theta state in that particular case, so that you have access to these other dimensions of your being. But it's exactly what you're talking about here.
You absolutely nail on the head for sure. That's it. And, to just extend one more level further, essentially to kind of complete the energy conversation, when breathing consciously, slowly, and intentionally, are shifting, like I mentioned this word state, we're shifting our vibrational state, and our vibration is what dictates everything, right? That is essentially where everything comes from and created from, is our vibrational energy frequency that we're putting out into the world. So if we are stuck in a lower vibrational state, meaning perhaps under the hooks and guise of shame or guilt or deep grief or anger or rage or any of these things, fear, all of that is eating away at us and creating the manifestation of that disease. And so when we breathe and we make this a practice, we shift our state and raise into a higher state of energy, in which then that becomes our reality. So it all begins on that foundational level of energy, and then it reverberates through all aspects of our life experience, because essentially this is one grand projection of our consciousness, this video game we call life.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cameron Martin, and I'd like to share with you a transformative method called Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique, or QHHT. Based on the work of Dolores Cannon, this technique is a profound tool for exploring your soul's journey, accessing deep healing, and releasing the patterns and blocks that may be holding you back. QHHT works by guiding you into a deep, relaxed state where we can access your subconscious mind. This is where your soul's memories and wisdom are stored, including information from past lives, karmic patterns, and even the root causes of physical issues you may be experiencing. By exploring these aspects of your soul's journey, we can uncover the answers you need to move forward with clarity and purpose. One of the unique things about QHHT is that it goes beyond surface level healing. We're not just addressing symptoms or temporary fixes. We're diving into the core of your being, getting to the root causes of the challenges that you are facing, and helping you release anything that no longer serves you, whether that's emotional baggage, unresolved trauma, or even physical conditions. During a session, you'll be able to access past life experiences that may be influencing your current life, gain insight into your soul's purpose, and receive guidance from your higher self on the next steps of your journey. Many people walk away from QHHT sessions feeling a profound sense of relief, clarity, and alignment with their soul's path. If you've been feeling stuck, dealing with recurring patterns, or simply want to understand how to live in alignment with your soul's purpose, QHHT is a powerful way to do that. If you're ready to access the answers and the healing that's waiting for you, I invite you to book your QHHT session with me today. I'm going to shift our conversation slightly to an aspect of that game that we call leadership. And so as a central focus to my work is really about supporting people in understanding and living, but also leading from their soul's purpose. And whether people think that they're a leader or not officially, right, with some title, some external title, if you're connected with your soul's practice, like your soul and your purpose, and if you're in your healing journey, my argument is that you are leading by default, because your energetics, everything you just said, is going to influence those around you. And so the conversation that we have on this show a lot and that I teach is around, being centered leadership. So recognizing our being, doing that first, and honoring the beingness of others so that essentially we influence and we can have an impact, not because we're manipulating and controlling, but because leadership is a natural expression of our being. And so I'm really curious how you see the intersection in your work, how you see the intersection of spirituality and leadership, but maybe more specifically breath and leadership. I'm curious for you.
Yeah, it's great. Great introduction to a really multidimensional topic. But to break down leadership and how I view leadership is very much on the same page as what you just shared. And, a really solid leader, right? Like what we see in the world today is not leadership. We may call them the free world leader. They aren't leaders. They're essentially
controllers
just
and actors.
yeah, exactly. And puppets to this game
And
that we're
puppets.
playing. And there's no leadership capacity at all. It's void, actually. A true leader is extremely self-aware, is understanding of one's perhaps strengths and weaknesses, gifts, talents, abilities, and is then proactively living in the world from this place of soul, from this place of heart, and is in service to something greater than themselves, and is giving back and supporting humanity to grow, evolve, and expand. And really what we will begin to see after this turning point, and we're already starting to see it, but more so in the next 5, 10, 15 years, is that we're going to have to be called, these of us, those of us that are doing this work, inner work, I mean, to step into a capacity of leadership, because the old structures and the systems are dying, right? We're in the crumbling phase right now. And so on the back end of this is going to need to be new structures, new innovations, new things being built. And more importantly, people that are in positions of true leadership that are really serving from this greater place. And there's a term in the Gene Keys, which is a system that I, very much am involved in, and it's called synarchy. And synarchy is a way in which the future may look in terms of how we view leadership. It's more horizontal. There's many leaders in one that are making decisions on the better half of the whole, versus the hierarchy, which is oftentimes rooted in many shadows, in which we see many of the corporations being led and the country being led and everything else being led. It's a top-down style where basically one person is calling the shots. They may have board members and other people helping with those decisions, but overall, it's a very skewed level. We need to get back to true coherence and collaboration and synarchy, and the manifestation of leadership through that lens is going to be totally different and more holistic.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what my work is about. There is so much resonance in what you just shared. I am curious more to say something about the Gene Keys, but we are watching the end of this era,
Yep.
of that top down frankly, toxic masculine, which, by the way, that phrase, I'm not as people overuse that one too, but I'm speaking about a very toxic energetic that is just not helpful.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that men are toxic, to be clear, for anybody listening. Um, but this paradigm of manipulation and control, and that you are just a pawn in my game and I just need to do this. And it's very egoic, frankly. It's a consciousness of separation and of division and of, um, taking and controlling and essentially power. That consciousness is leaving this planet. And we're seeing this through our humanity's awakening. And it's happening in different ways. I mean, first of all, this conversation, the fact that people are listening to it is just uh, evidence of it. But we're seeing, especially since 2020, the number of people who, don't want to work for a corporation anymore, who are creating their own businesses, who are leading the way in their own sovereignty, who are expecting more, who are creating compounds for food and whatever community organizations, and a lot of Gen Z coming through. Now they're getting a bit older and they don't see the world at all like this, and they're not accepting it like this. I even see my nephews, who I don't know technically what generation they're in, but they're 6, 5, and 7.
Generation Alpha.
Okay, so they're alpha. And even just hearing the stories about them in school, it's super clear to me that they're either not going to finish school, or schooling is going to have to change dramatically, because they are just not having it. They are, quote, not behaving and they're not fitting into the system. But all of this to say, this energetic is happening inside of humanity in varying degrees, of course, and in different generations, energetically differently. But it's requiring us to reconsider what leadership actually is, which
Yeah.
is essentially what you were talking about and what I am. That leadership, we have to ask ourselves the question, what is this for? Because what we've seen in 2020 to now, we're recording in 24, is just a whole bunch of manipulation and control, and this paradigm of leadership pushed way far to one end that is not serving people in the slightest. The only thing it's serving is somebody's corporate gain, someone getting rich, but not humanity as a whole. And we're waking up to it and we're realizing it. And so it's requiring us to now look at not only the bigger questions of why are we here, but what is this for? And what is leadership really supposed to be about? And I'm totally aligned with what you're saying, that it's about service to the collective and learning to recognize that I'm not operating from ego. If I actually want to serve and want to lead and want to influence in a way that is for the betterment, I actually need to be tapped in to myself. I need to have a connection to source, God, oneness, Adonai, whatever, however you understand your connection with source itself. But without that, there isn't leadership in the future, in my opinion.
Couldn't have said it better. Beautiful, eloquently stated. And yeah, overall, what's, just to kind of put a cap on that sort of topic in that conversation, unless there's further, inquiry or questions you have there, I would say that overall, humanity is undergoing the biggest, perhaps ever, metamorphosis, where it's all starting within. It's all, as we said, the projection of our own consciousness. It's all coming from within. And there is, the gene keys even speak to this in the 55th gene key, which is very interesting. So there's these 3 convergence points: 1987, year I was born; 2012, which we know about in the sort of Mayan calendar and the sort of correlations there; and then 2027. And essentially, these are 3 very massive catalyst points for the evolution and awakening of what the gene keys and Richard Rudd describes as human 2.0. And the manifestation of that comes through the solar plexus. So there's a mutation that actually happens in the solar plexus. And maybe getting a little fringe, but it's actually maybe worth the conversation, is that how I've tied this back Because over the years, for me, I always like looking at all information available. And there's been this sort of topic matter that was discussed. I think I heard this theory back in 2015, but what someone had called the solar flash. And essentially, the solar flash, what has been theorized, is a mass coronal ejection from the sun that either is experienced individually, right, and what we can say is the sun actually lives within us, and that sun is the transmutation of our solar plexus, solar sun energy. That's a individualized event as we expand our consciousness. Or it's been theorized that this is a human experience and a global collective experience in which there is an external solar flash that actually upgrades our consciousness, but not without destroying pretty much everything in its path, and having these 3 days of darkness where there would be this time and introspection. There may be fear for many, but a time to go within and allow this new consciousness to take place, where it essentially is rewiring our genetic code in our DNA. So there's two theories there. I don't know which one is true, or for me personally, there's been a lot of synchronicities around this flash in this year 2027, and disclosure and galactic life, and there's a lot of interesting threads that tie into it. But overall, there is no question we are going through some massive change, and people, better be ready, because it's gonna get a little chaotic for a bit. And it needs to, frankly, the shadow needs to be seen, and the underbelly of the beast needs to come out, and we need to face that, because all of that is just a manifestation of what we're experiencing internally.
Totally. And talk about the ultimate in leadership, which is
Yep.
leading ourselves through this transformation. Hey there. If you're enjoying what we're diving into here on the podcast and want to go deeper, I want to invite you to check out the Soul Purpose Collective. The Soul Purpose Collective is my online community where like-minded changemakers, creatives, and leaders come together to explore what it takes to align and lead from their soul's purpose. Head over to yourpathandpurpose.com/SPC for more details. We'd love to have you join us. There is so much I could say on this topic, and I could totally geek out with you, but I did want to point out that we're talking about the solar plexus, and just a little bit ago, I was describing, when we were talking about breath and my body and the diaphragm, what was I pointing to but the solar plexus area, which I think is very interesting. So it's totally a synchronicity I want to play with here. I actually think both of these theories, as you described them, that you presented, I think both are true. If we are one with the universe, then both would have to be true, that there is something internally happening and something externally mirroring, much like, in my practice with astrology, I don't believe the stars or the planets are banging around up there like a billiards game, causing things to happen within us, but that they represent natural energetic cycles that are happening, as above, so below, right? As within, so without. And so everything is interconnected. So is one causing the other, or are they both happening, or where's the source of it? If it's all one, then it doesn't really matter. Both are happening, right?
This is true.
But I do love what you were describing, because I do talk about it, but I haven't, not explicitly in the way I'm about to on this show, that we are moving through a massive shift in consciousness on the planet, and you can see it. And I'm someone who is extremely sensitive. My physical body is sensitive to all kinds of energy. It's what makes me deeply psychic. But I will say, a lot of solar activity is happening, and I see it, and there's reports about it, but I go outside and I feel it. And then my body has struggled through, it seems every time there's like some sort of a solar flare happening, more so than normal, my body goes through some real changes, discomfort, whatever. And actually, just a few weeks ago, I suffered from heat exhaustion, or basically near heat stroke, which I never in my life
Wow.
experience that. And what happened was I was kind of tired that day, and I went for a hike here at Griffith Park in Los Angeles, and it was sunny, but it was only like, 82 degrees or whatever. At 3 o'clock, people told me that was a mistake. Maybe. But the point was, I went up there and it was warm. I felt tired. But what I know happened is that I actually took in so much light and so much sun. And I was actually quite sick for the next day. I mean, my body couldn't even regulate its temperature. I had a fever, which really sucked. I felt like my insides were burning. I did nothing but sleep for a whole day. And it took me, honestly, about 2 weeks to get over that and feel better.
Mm.
Um, and I'm actually on the other side of it now, where I'm still kind of feeling tired, to be honest, but I've always been sensitive to changes with the sun, solar activity, all of that. But I think this experience showed me firsthand that the sun, which we know scientifically, you can go look at NASA's information, all of that is changing energetically, but that the sun affects us. It is quite literally the source of all life. And I had a really big experience of that. And not only was I, quote, sick for 2 weeks, and I'm air quoting here, what happened was deep rest. Like I had to stop, and I had to like stop thinking, stop moving, um, a lot more meditation, a lot more psychic awareness. I recognized a lot of patterns from my past. A lot of familial stuff was coming up. It was like a major period of purge and healing that was correlated with the sun and
Mm.
my exposure to it. And so I share all of this because when we talk about humanity's ascension and shifting in consciousness, there is a correlation quite literally to our solar system and what is happening with where we are in the cosmos. And it's all connected. And as we learn to integrate more light into our being, as you said, our DNA is actually changing. The reason I felt sick was because quite literally my body was overwhelmed with light and it was having some sort of effect. And I know there's people listening going, oh my God, I can relate to this. I feel like I'm sick and this, that, and the other thing. And people think they have COVID and they think they have that. And no, you don't. Actually, your body is shifting and releasing dense consciousness, and it's healing. And this is what it looks like. But if you're not aware that this consciousness shift is happening on planet Earth, you think, oh my God, I'm sick, I'm dying, and I'm losing my shit. You may be losing your shit, but it's all old shit that just needs to like let go. But anyway, I love that you brought up the topic because I could say so much about it, of course.
Mm.
But this is what ascension looks like. And it doesn't come without the psychic component, right?
Yeah,
The
for sure.
recognition of like, oh, I'm carrying this old pattern and this ancestral fear and this thing that needs to go because my physical body can't carry it anymore if I'm shifting my frequency,
Yep.
right? Like this physically, this density can't stay with me anymore. So it's a very physical thing. I know a lot of people, when they talk about spiritual enlightenment or ascension or whatever, it's this idea of I can just meditate my way out of my body and just, be with, the ascended masters somewhere up there. And the reality is our ascension, our shift, it's in the physical body.
We have
Like
to
we are
descend to
souls that came
ascend.
into the body.
We have to descend it to ascend. Descension is the first process, and it's the descension, as you were saying, into the body, into the patterns, into the grief that we have don't allow ourselves to feel and experience to then ascend and clear that energy. So absolutely 100% to what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's going to be an interesting period the next. I mean, I know this astrologically, and my audience knows this. It's going to be an interesting period the next, I'd say, decade or two, but certainly the next 3 to 5 years, because our entire world is going to change. The ways in which we relate to each other, the ways in which we create systems, the ways in which we lead, which is why we're having this conversation. And I actually invite you to pay attention to your breath as I'm saying this, because if it's shallow and you're feeling fear and constriction, that's important to recognize. But maybe you're feeling expansion and excitement around that. Either way, it's going to happen. And we need this because the ways in which we have existed on planet Earth can't serve us any further.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
I love that you brought that topic up. Oh my God, could geek out on that forever. But I think as we close up our time together, I want to, first of all, just say to everyone, pay attention to your breath as you move through shifts, right? But I actually want to invite you to do something. I don't know why I'm doing this, but it's what's being invited. Oftentimes when I do workshops or I work with my clients, I ask them to pause, think, and reflect and close in one breath. And so I want to invite you to sort of share your final parting words in one breath.
So what I feel called to share and what is coming through right now is that one of the things that we often it's very foreign to us, just put it this way, is this level of trust. As I had talked about earlier, trust is such a pivotal component in this journey of life. To trust yourself, to trust the universe, to trust the unknown, to trust the intelligence of life. It is a big hurdle for many of us because we have played victim to our lives where we perceive that things are happening to us and that we live in a malevolent expression of the universe, which is actually quite the opposite. We live in a benevolent universe and everything is happening for you, and it's actually happening through you to allow you to grow, to heal, to expand, to evolve into a greater expression of yourself. And so when we begin to breathe deep, when we begin to allow our breath to guide us, we are guided into a place of support, into a place of trust where we can then open ourselves up to receive life. What are we doing when we're breathing? We're receiving life. There's this flow that's happening, and we can't receive life through a constricted, tense body. We can only receive it through a light, a very clear, energetic field. And so when we begin to breathe and we have this reciprocal giving nature with our breath back and forth, we are taking in and drinking in life. And through that, we are guided to exactly where we need to be when we need to be there. And when we begin to instill this level of faith and trust within us, we can know that there are absolutely no mistakes and that we are exactly where we need to be at all times. And to trust that, to trust yourself, and to trust the higher universal flow is the ultimate lesson and where all of our peace lies.
Beautiful message. Thank you, brother. Also, I'm going to pick on you. You must have crazy breath retention. One breath. So I'll give you this space because, by the way, that message was beautiful. So thank you for that. But maybe in one breath, how would you leave that?
In one breath.
In one breath.
Breathe. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this time with me today. Our conversation was amazing. I loved it. So thank you so much. I'm sure listeners do as well. And if you'd like to connect with Christopher and know more about his work, you can find more details in the show notes. So thank you for being here with me.
Appreciate you.
A heartfelt thanks to you for tuning into this episode. I'm Dr. Cameron Martin, and it's been an honor to support you on your path to self-discovery. As you reflect on today's conversation, remember that the journey toward living and leading from your soul's purpose is ongoing. You're never alone in it. Until next time.